Today we're here with Pete from Delphi, a communications company. Communications company, is that what we call ourselves?
Yeah, strategic communications consultancy, I guess we would say, for being fancy.
Sounds fancy. I like it. To talk about AI narratives and what's going on. The thing that sort of got me into it and thinking about narratives was your LinkedIn post, Pete, that sort of talked about three of the biggest narratives that you're seeing at the moment out there, which we'll get into in a minute. But I think the initial question I have for you is, like, what's behind this endless fascination with AI? Why are people like, I need to know more?
Yeah, I mean, wow, where do we start? I mean, I guess really in the recent past, this all dates back to the launch of ChatGPT, which was November 2022, which suddenly exploded this whole technology and made it probably consumer friendly and understandable and approachable in a way that it hadn't been before. Obviously, AI, you can trace the technological history of AI back to the 1940s or 50s, and it's gone through lots of peaks and troughs over the decades as people have tried to work out how this stuff would happen in practice. Probably from the mid 2010s, so maybe around 2014, 15, 16, there was the emergence of machine learning and some breakthroughs of neural networks, which was like the most recent iteration of AI. So suddenly the technology seemed to kind of catch on and start to work, and there'd been lots of talk over that time around AI and what it might mean. But really, it was ChatGPT under 2 years ago that suddenly made this a much more mainstream conversation. It was a huge kind of proof point or use case that everyone could kind of try themselves on the web and get their mind blown. And that was the thing that's really kind of transformed this conversation into, okay, wow, this is the next big thing from a tech perspective. And ever since then, it's been the number one conversation in the tech sector, pretty much the only conversation in the tech sector, and arguably probably the number one conversation in business more generally, because every business in the world is grappling with this and working out, what is our AI story? How is this going to affect us? What are we doing in this space? So that's probably why 2023 was definitely the year of AI in the tech world. Everything was kind of AI related. That's carried on into 2024. But it's such early days in AI, and Jeff Bezos used to talk about day one for the it's still day one for the internet. It's definitely still day one for AI. We are very early in this. We have lots of questions and not many answers. I always kind of liken it to almost like 1993 with the internet. For those of us who are old enough to remember a world before the internet, when we were sort of told that this thing was coming and it's going to be big and it's exciting and there's all these things you could do with it, but no one was really quite sure. And actually what it looked like was lots of toys and lots of fiddling around and experimenting, and not really any mass successful mainstream use cases yet. That's kind of where we are with AI. So yeah, that's a long answer to your first question.
No, that's exactly how it feels as well, doesn't it? I'm curious, like, is was your first experience with AI ChatGPT? Was that when you sort of went?
Yeah, because I think before that, working in the tech sector, we had lots of clients that we worked with, companies that we worked with, who loved to talk about AI, but it all felt very intangible, and no one could really show us what they were doing. It was essentially just another fancy term for the latest kind of software tools that would do lots of data analysis, but that's really hard to kind of visualize and hard to get your head around. I think the kind of genius with ChatGPT was it was a consumer-friendly user interface that anyone could try on the web, and suddenly even the most frivolous and trivial kind of use cases, write a poem in the style of, Taylor Swift or whatever the kind of thing was that went around on the internet or at that time. It just allowed people to understand it. Okay, wow, this stuff, I could put a question or a prompt into a website, and this AI chatbot essentially spits something back to me, which is incredibly clever. And that was the kind of light bulb moment, I think, for lots of people.
Yeah, where are you at with it now?
I think the hype is probably cooling a little bit because we're starting to get into the reality of, okay, what are we actually doing with this stuff? How are we actually implementing this stuff in practice? For us at Delphi, we talk about using it in our workflow actually in some quite simple and straightforward ways, but I think that reflects where the technology is right now and kind of what its capabilities, frankly. So, we use it to create, we talk about creating the zero draft. Before the first draft, you can use AI to create a zero draft of a document, an agenda, a blog post, a plan, and it just gives you some rough clay to start with, and you can then kind of shape it further from there. Or it can do really useful things like record calls and then give you a summary and actions afterwards, and that becomes really useful. So it's things like that which aren't life-changing just yet, but are really, really helpful and really useful. And I think we're starting to kind of get used to embedding it into the way that we work a bit more.
Interesting. Something I keep running into, because we've started rolling out a bit of it in our business, is it's really exciting when you think of the idea and then the actual implementation rollout. You're kind of less enthusiastic about it. Is that something you're feeling as well? You're like, no.
Yeah, I think my co-founder Louis always has this great phrase, which is every big idea descends into a lot of hard work ultimately, and that's kind of the reality of any new idea and project in life, right?
Exactly. And you'd go, oh, that's a good idea. Right, into your three narratives, because I'm fascinated by this. I really like them. Can you just give us an overview of sort of what this take is and how it all fits together?
Yeah, I mean, I guess where this came from is, our job is to keep an eye on the way that the media conversation is evolving and the way that people are writing about and kind of covering a particular topic. And obviously AI is the number one topic at the moment and has been for a while. What we noticed was there were kind of three strands of the conversation that were starting to move a bit beyond the initial kind of hype conversation and the excitement and the endorphin rush, as you say. So there were sort of three strands to that. One was actually this stuff is a bit of a bubble, and that's kind of the classic calling the peak of the market, the top of the market, and sort of saying, look, the hype is overblown. Actually, when you look at the uses of these products, they're not actually being very widely used right now. There's lots of data out there. There's a Goldman Sachs report that says, only 5% of companies in the US are regularly using generative AI, for instance. There's other data that shows that people try these products once. There's some Reuters Institute data from Oxford in the UK that says people use these products once and then they rarely come back. I think 2% of people in the UK and 2% of people in France regularly use generative AI tools. So it's very small single-digit numbers of people who are using this stuff. I think we might have a slightly warped perspective because actually marketing and communications is the number one use case for generative AI right now, according to McKinsey. So we are like the people exposed to the cutting edge of this stuff, and we probably think it is going to change everything because it's affecting us first. But there's lots and lots of jobs and lots of realms of life where actually this generative AI stuff doesn't work as well and hasn't found its place quite yet. So there's a reason to be skeptical for that particular reason. There's also people who point out, look, a lot of the stuff that these AI tools create isn't correct. It's not good. The data, the facts are wrong. It misleads you with hallucinations. It makes stuff up, and it makes silly errors. So there's lots of reasons to maybe be a little bit skeptical, just in terms of how good these tools are. And then there's the skepticism based on the valuations feel really, really high. Nvidia's share price as the kind of the leading chip maker for AI systems is has gone up from a few hundred billion to something like 3 trillion, I think, in valuation, and that's just maybe that's a bit toppy. So that's kind of the reasons for like the bubble kind of argument, and I think all of these arguments have good evidence and reasons for them and are made by reasonable people. So you can always see a kind of grain of truth in each of them. So that was the first narrative around the bubble. Then the second strand of conversation, I've called that normalisation, because I think it's from the people who want to kind of say, actually, this stuff isn't as earth-shattering as maybe some other people say, and they want to kind of bring the temperature down a little bit in the conversation around AI. This is often a conversation advanced by companies, probably not in the tech sector themselves, creating these tools, but the end users of them. And they sort of say, almost like taking the high ground, look, this stuff is just another tool. We've been using it for ages, actually, and it's not going to upend our work. It's actually something we're very comfortable with. So they're trying to kind of demonstrate how they are knowledgeable and experienced with it already. A great example is JP Morgan in their annual report earlier this year. Jamie Dimon's writing about how actually we've been using AI for a decade, and I first mentioned AI in my annual report in 2017. So he's kind of sort of saying, look, just don't worry, calm down. We're on the case. We're on top of it, and AI is just something that we're using as normal within our business.
Interesting. There's actually, I read maybe a McKinsey study recently that actually broke out AI into a bunch of different sectors. Like it was generative AI and then like analytics, and I thought that was a much more interesting way to break it out, because then you can see, oh, this one's been in place for ages.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of smoke and mirrors around how people are using the term AI and what they are calling AI, for sure.
Oh, very much so.
So that was the second strand of the conversation. And the third strand is what I called resistance, which is, I guess, the fact that every movement creates an equal and opposite counter movement, right? So the movement into AI and the development of AI has also sparked this kind of resistance to artificial content and computer generated stuff. And there's a small niche of people out there who are sort of saying, we don't want AI to create this stuff. We want to be proudly, human, 100% human created. And it's almost like the organic food movement in kind of big agriculture, I guess. And it's sort of saying, look, some of us need to take a different approach and protect human workers and believe in organically created content and information, and not just rely on bots to create anything. So you're also getting a little bit, there's a really fascinating article in the Atlantic magazine about this, about businesses and brands, clearly sort of saying everything that we do is 100% human made, and there's no AI in anything we produce.
The Atlantic does some really good AI reporting. I read one today about the music industry and how they're using it. Going back to these narratives, when I hear the word narrative, one of the things that I think about, the cynic in me goes like, who's behind these narratives? Like, who has something to gain from each of these narratives? So starting with the bubble one, why, like, what sort of person's pushing this narrative? What's the incentive, or what's the thought behind this?
Yeah, it's interesting, because actually a lot of the people pushing that are people within the tech sector. I don't think anyone denies how important AI is, but there's a little bit of skepticism maybe to, you can differentiate yourself and make a career for yourself as a bit of a contrarian sometimes, or you can spot an investment opportunity. But yeah, I think it mostly comes from within the tech sector, from people who are a little bit more knowledgeable than average and are probably a bit more skeptical because they think some of the marketing claims don't meet the reality of these products when they use them.
How much would you say, I guess they're different narratives, but how much would you say the bubble narratives and the resistance narratives cross over?
I think they're coming from a different perspective. I think the resistance narrative is from, a lot of the time, from creative people who see it as a threat to their jobs, and want to maintain the kind of human value within creativity, broadly defined. I mean, that could be art and music on one end of the spectrum. It could be just, advertising and marketing material on the other end of the spectrum. But it's sort of, the things that humans have historically created is now kind of under threat. And I think there are people who worry about that, but that's coming from a different perspective than those who think, Nvidia's share price is overvalued, for instance.
Yeah. I guess the question you just brought up for me is: are you worried about creativity? Are you worried about AI taking your job, or
I'm not worried about it getting rid of my job, but I think it is perfectly feasible that, in fact, probably likely, that AI technology will replace a hell of a lot of jobs, because every technology does that, but it also creates other jobs at the same time. So I think where we're potentially heading is to a world in which, because these bots can just create stuff, essentially an infinite amount of stuff forever, we're going to get to a point where the internet becomes dominated by bots, and most of the content that you will come across online will be created not by a human being. And that is like a fundamental, profound change. So this is one of the big philosophical consequences of AI, right? That's, if you can understand where the hype comes from, because it fundamentally changes our relationship to, as human beings, to knowledge and creativity. We've never had another intelligence alongside humans who can create stuff like this before. So that's pretty profound, and we don't quite know what the consequences of that will be. That could lead us to going down that resistance route of saying, okay, we will then have to seek out the premium niche where human created stuff can still be found, and we'll pay more for that because we know it's created by humans. It will stand out. It will feel different to us in some way. But all of that kind of implication could fundamentally change the role of creative people in the world, and we don't quite know what that looks like yet, but it sounds big, right?
it's interesting because this is something I've been thinking about and talking about a lot with people, and there's a bunch of different things. Like the number one immediate concern going all the way back that I think about is this race to the bottom for companies. Everything, like a client's going to look at us and say, why do we need you anymore? Or like, my AI can do this cheaper, or even like an alternative can do it cheaper for a similar quality. I think like that's the immediate thing that freaks a lot of people out. But then beyond that, I've been thinking about everything kind of becomes a preview of a preview of a preview. Like if you've got information here and someone's getting ChatGPT to summarize it for them here, and then maybe they send an email in Gmail, and now Gmail's got that summarize feature in an email, and now like, what are we even talking about? Like, who's doing anything? Everything is just a preview of a preview. And what happens to our realities of like what we believe is real, what is anything?
Yeah, I mean that's part of the joke around, AI takes a few bullet points that I write, expands it into an email that it gets sent to you, and then your AI turns it from an email back into some bullet points again to summarize it, right? So it's like, I also think that there's an aspect of human beings like to deal with other human beings and will want to work with other people. And AI will be tools that we use within that work, and that work will end up looking different. But fundamentally, we want to have a business relationship with another person.
Very true. The other thought on the creativity that I often have is, how much will the world become about curation rather than creation? It will be, this person over here has found 20 really good AI things and put like an image and a blog together. And how much of it will actually be what we call creation right now, of like sitting there coming up with an idea versus assembling a bunch of really good parts. And I'd sort of look at, I did an episode a while ago on influencers and artificial influencers. And just thinking about how well positioned anyone who has like an influencer following is to actually thrive in this world of like, there's more content than ever, and they can just, it's just, they're the filter. People trust them and their taste. So it's almost like a taste economy. Feels like what's coming immediately.
Yeah, I mean, influencers is a great example of where very soon, I'm guessing, the vast majority of influencers and accounts on something like Instagram will be bots. I went to a really interesting event a few months ago where there was a conversation around, okay, do people care about whether the content they consume, whether it's a movie, a book, an Instagram feed, is created by a human being or not. And I think we like to assume that actually human beings do care about that, but I don't think really they do. I think that's the brutal reality of human nature, is that we are very simple animals who like looking at pretty pictures, and it doesn't matter actually whether those pictures are of a real human or of an artificial influencer on Instagram, for instance. And given that the supply of those artificial influencers is infinite, they will very quickly take over and dominate. So it's going to actually be quite hard for human influencers and creators to survive in that kind of landscape. And arguably, you can get into a philosophical debate about this again, but arguably what matters more about art and creativity is perhaps what we take out of it more than what goes into it. So it doesn't matter whether a human has put their heart and soul into a painting or not. The painting could be created by an AI. What matters more about it is how we receive it and what we take out of it as the audience. And so that's going to be the reality, I think, for how lots of us engage with creativity and marketing output. I think the other factor that's interesting here is kind of where marketing and marketing companies and brands are in their use of AI right now. So if you look at, I would argue, if you look at how WPP or a big advertiser like Coca-Cola, for instance, are using AI, they're using it in the classical way of new technologies, which is they're getting more output for less input. Right, so they are creating hundreds of iterations of the same creative, or they're translating it into multiple languages really, really quickly. So that's kind of where we are from an AI perspective. We're optimizing and translating stuff into AI, but we're not reimagining it and reinventing it completely from scratch.
Any bets on where you think AI as the beginning point of marketing is going to go?
Wow. That's a big question. I mean, if I knew the answer, I probably wouldn't be sitting here, I guess. I think, well, one of the ways that we use AI is in that ideation phase. So using it as a brainstorming partner. That is one of the genuinely useful things that AI can do at the moment. And, ChatGPT and similar kind of chatbots can be infinitely patient with you as you ask stupid questions and ask for 5 more versions, please, 5 more versions, and it will just keep giving you different options and different ideas, and that's incredible. And that is something that's sort of genuinely new and really useful in the average workflow for a marketing or communications person. I think we haven't quite cracked yet how that use case goes beyond that and kind of embeds in everything. So that's still the kind of the unknown, I guess.
I haven't cracked it either. Don't worry, Pete. I don't have a lot of ideas here. I was hoping you did. Back to the sort of narratives. We've covered bubbles and who's sort of behind them. What about normalisation? Who's driving that?
I think normalisation mostly comes from not the tech companies themselves, but companies in other sectors who are using these technologies and want to reassure the market, their investors, their customers, their employees as well, that they are on top of this stuff and that they can say, we've been using this stuff for a decade. So it's the companies who are trying to sort of say, look, we've heard lots for years now about social, mobile, cloud, big data. We were told that all of these were the new hot things and we had to have a strategy for each of them and they were all going to disrupt our business. So they're kind of taking that slightly higher level perspective of saying AI is just another one of those kinds of trends and tools. Yeah. Now, whether that's true or not, I think is arguable. But by kind of putting it into perspective, they can calm down maybe some of the fears and worries about just how negatively disruptive AI is going to be for them, and instead sort of highlight their own credentials and credibility in implementing it well and benefiting from it and sort of creating value from it.
Interesting. It's interesting balancing that, like, we've been doing it for a long time with actually sounding innovative as well. Um, like it's a tricky balance for them being like, nothing's out of the ordinary, but also we're doing the cool thing.
That's very tricky, and I think lots of companies all want their own AI story and their own kind of way of saying, here's what we're doing with AI, and here's how, we're kind of leading the way on it. I think the reality is, because it's such early days, most companies struggle with genuine evidence and proof points. So a lot of our advice to clients is, keep your story realistic about how you're using AI in your business, but also have a point of view on how this is going to develop for you and in your sector, particularly in the years ahead. You can show how you are thinking about this technology and planning for it, even if it's not quite there in implementation just yet.
Yeah, I think the other reality is that all of the companies, aside from the big companies, are using the same 8 to 10 APIs, and everyone's actually just using the exact same technology in very similar ways. And I don't think that's talked about enough. Is like, no one. Yes, there's the innovation of like language models, but and how you use them, but everyone's just plugging into the same stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you've got OpenAI and Microsoft, you've got Amazon and Anthropic, you've got Facebook with its open source Llama model, you've got Google and Gemini, and you've got Apple Intelligence doing kind of its own thing. And then you've got a few small kind of standalone companies like, Perplexity or Mistral, for instance. But outside of those, what's that, 7 or 8 different companies, every other company in the world is a user of those products and systems in different ways. And that's the reality, that those are the companies that are leading the conversation and pioneering the technology, because they're investing the multi billions of dollars that you need. I mean, you're talking about, $5 to $10 billion now to build a new LLM, and soon, predictions are it might be 50 billion, 100 billion. Well, there aren't many companies that have that cash on hand to invest in a single product, whose product market fit and commercialization isn't clear yet. So that is very, very limiting to a tiny number of very wealthy companies. So yeah, for everyone else, it's about, okay, how are we using this stuff in our business, and how are we thinking about the impact it will have? What are we changing, and what are we reimagining from scratch? Those are kind of where the conversations are, I think.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're seeing as well. Right, the final narrative, the resistance narrative, which I think is my favorite, just because I kind of am fascinated by people who are like resistant to change. Like, I just want to dive into like what their fears are, and it's like the most emotional one in my opinion. But who do you think's behind it?
Well, I think there's always a certain fraction of people who are in this kind of view of like, enough, like, stop the world, I want to get off. We've had enough of change and new things and technology in particular. Like, there's always a small fraction of people who I think fit into that category, and actually potentially that category is growing as the speed of change picks up, right, and more things culturally and societally and technologically change faster than ever within the space of a single lifetime or the space of a single decade. And that's kind of faster than the human brain is built to handle. So I think there are always people who dislike rapid technological change and the social and cultural consequences of it. I think especially amongst creative people, journalists, artists, filmmakers, musicians, including marketing and communications people as well, by the way, this technology is very powerful and disruptive for them, particularly on their careers, on their livelihoods, and for a lot of those creative people as well. Their work is more than just a job; it's their passion. It's like a self-definition thing as well. It's the kind of person they are. It's what they care about. So to take that away is hugely painful and frightening for them. So I think there is a bunch of people who fit into that category who see AI as frightening and they're worried about it, or who dislike it for various reasons. And some of them probably see an opportunity to differentiate as well. If you're a brand, a bit like Dove doing a real beauty campaign, or Ben and Jerry's in the 80s and 90s, kind of being more hippie-ish than hardcore capitalism. There's an opportunity for a brand to differentiate by saying we are not going to use AI in any of our marketing, in any of our content creation, in any of our creativity. So you're always going to have probably an opportunity for someone to zig when everyone else is zagging type thing. And I think also there are just some people who are a little bit sick and tired of the change that technology is bringing to their lives as well, frankly.
The resistance stuff fascinates me, and I think align with your view on people don't really care who's doing the creative or who's making it. Maybe not because it's a personal thing, but like just as an economic choice. If you look at things like GMO or organic movements, or like the reality is people spend like their money on the cheapest things 90% of the time. Like they might say they support the environment, but when it comes to buying things, they really, really don't. And
totally,
I don't think there's as much at stake with AI generated content, but I think we'll probably find the same thing pans out.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the economics of it, they go to zero essentially from an AI perspective, right? You can have infinite content and infinite labor from an AI bot in the way that you can't for humans. So that essentially drives the cost of all creative output towards zero. That's pretty terrifying for an artist or creative person.
I guess the thing that interests me when it comes to things like the AI free or the similar to being GMO movements is GMO, there's at least a very clear perceived harm of like there are chemicals going into my body. What are the perceived harms of the people who are AI free concerned about?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think in the Atlantic article they talk about probably a few different things. There's a sense of there is an economic disruption aspect to it. So there's a sense of, okay, by using AI to create this stuff, I'm putting someone else out of a job, or I'm taking work from a creative person.
Yeah.
There is also, to some extent, a philosophical thing about it doesn't mean as much if it's created by a bot versus by a human. This is the thing about, does it matter what goes into the work of art? Is it better that this track I'm listening to on Spotify was created by a human musician versus an algorithm? Is there a soul to that? To the output. Does it mean something? Is there a human spark in there? And then a lot of this stuff is just going to be pushed at us as well. Remember, in various different social feeds and various different apps. So we won't really necessarily have a choice about what we consume and who created it. It will just be presented to us on a platform that we already have a relationship with. So I think there's probably a mixture of pragmatic, economic, and philosophical reasons why people dislike the idea of AI created content.
100%. Going back to the point you made earlier about there's some of it we won't have a choice and platforms will just push it to us. It's something that I've sort of thought about a while ago, and how it just homogenizes. When platforms push us stuff, they're almost incentivized to, this person liked this, so Netflix is an example. This person liked this video, so you'll like this video as well. And I wonder what it does to like homogenizing culture, and everyone's sort of just seeing the same things, and we're all going down into this. Everyone likes this sort of thing. The other example would be like Grammarly. I am not a huge fan of Grammarly. I'm like, what are you doing to language? There's no like one way to write something. If you know how grammar works, like it's probably great for people who aren't great writers and don't know how it works. But I personally, I'm like, what's this doing? Telling everyone that there is one specific way you should write something.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's another concern I have when it comes to everyone using AI and being served AI content frequently.
Oh, totally. I mean, we've worried a lot in the last decade about the power that platforms have over us, right? And social networks in particular. AI is even more consolidated and unified than those platforms ever were, because it puts the power in the hands of an ever smaller number of companies and therefore people behind them, and the decisions that those companies make are enormously influential in embedding social norms and standards and expectations and values into the experience and the billions of people have. So the conversations and debates over acceptable speech on Facebook, for instance, is a great example of where someone has to make a decision about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable somewhere. That always comes down to a person making that decision ultimately over what the algorithm does or does not do, or does or does not allow. And exactly the same principle is going to apply to AI. The challenge we've got is that AI is even more of a black box than social media algorithms, right? One of the fundamental thing we don't know about AI is we don't know how it works. And the people who are AI computer scientists are very open about the fact that we don't actually have an idea of how AI works. We have found it working in practice, but we have no theory that gives us an explanation of how AI works and allows us to kind of build a predictable, replicable model for that. So that's quite a remarkable thing to have to accept and understand, but that is the reality. We don't know how AI works. We don't know exactly how it makes the decisions it makes. So the way in which it shapes content and then what we see is still a bit of a mystery to us. And at some point, we're going to have to kind of grapple with that.
Interesting. Right, I've got one last question to wrap it up, Pete. And I've been dying to ask you the whole time, because I think I know my answer to this question. But which of these narratives do you think you subscribe to?
Oh, wow. Well, I'm always going to take the cop-out answer, which is it's not my job to subscribe to any of them. My job is to watch and observe and analyze the way in which influential people and the media in particular are talking about this kind of technology. So I don't have to make that decision. I can see the logic behind all of these narratives, and I think there's always going to be a small number of people who buy into the resistance argument. I think that's going to be an ongoing thing, actually, which might even get a little bit stronger in time as AI becomes more dominant and more of the content we see on the internet becomes bot created and not human created. So I can imagine that one actually getting stronger. I think the normalization one always sounds a bit cheesy at the beginning because it's trying to downplay a technology which we know is going to be transformational to a greater or lesser extent. But actually, over time, again, of course, things get normalized just as the internet has got normalized, and it becomes less of a novelty and more of a fact of life. But we've got a long way to run on normalizing AI, right? We're just in the foothills. And then on the bubble piece, probably we are at the top of the market in lots of ways. I mean, it's hard to see Nvidia getting too valued even more highly than it is right now. But a bit like the internet itself, the value creation is going to carry on for many years to come, probably decades to come. So we are at a peak of hype right now, but we're probably going to continue to benefit from AI for many years.
Interesting. I think I have the complete zag answer to your answer, which is throughout, like as we've gone through these, I've been like, yeah, I've been that person. I've been that person. I've been that person. I think it's all of them. I think it depends what day you ask me. Some days I'm like full enthusiasm. Some days I've rolled out a boring AI project and been like, I don't care about this. Can we move on? Yeah, maybe we don't have to subscribe to one. The only other ones I kind of want to ask you about are like, how are you using AI in your day to day? It's probably the big one. Like, what are you guys actually doing if it's not too much behind the curtain?
So the big ways that we're using AI are through creating that zero draft of documents that I talked about. So giving us a starting point on a plan, on a blog post, on a social post, or an agenda, like just something to work with. That's a real time saver. One of them is also in then the creative ideation part, so providing a sparring partner for brainstorming. Actually, also often coming up with the bad ideas that you want to avoid, like because of the way that AI works, right? It's a predictive language system that gives you the next most likely word in any sentence. That means it defaults to the average, it defaults to the mediocre, and it defaults to the obvious because it's based on what it's learnt from before. So in my role as a strategist, for instance, where I'm coming up with insights for my clients to shape what their message should be and how they differentiate themselves, a lot of what AI can do is provide the average, obvious, expected answer and observation, and that provides me with stuff to distinguish myself from and to avoid. So it's actually quite helpful from that perspective as well. And then the third thing is around providing the kind of admin support around transcribing calls, around summarizing documents. So those are some of the kind of ways where around the edges of our job they provide time savers and kind of patience that we might not always have ourselves, and just time that we don't always have ourselves. Where we're not at yet is completely revolutionizing workflows from scratch, and I think that's, as I said, that's the next phase.